So it is supposed to be an evening with Natalie, and now is her chance. As I said, Natalie is the leader of the Green Party in England and Wales. Like me, she's a journalist to trade, was born in Australia and has made her home in London, where she's stood in both local and national elections. So I've no doubt she has views on both democracy and identity, clearly being a bit of an expert in both. I'm also pleased to hear that she's been doing some missionary work, because my younger son, who temporarily is living in London, was delighted to find that she was conducting a Yes meeting and duly attended it, and apparently it was a great success. So she's been doing some missionary work down there. I don't think you could describe what you're doing here as missionary work, but we're very glad you're here. Please welcome again Natalie Bennett.
Well, thank you very much for that welcome. Thank you for everyone who's come along this evening when there's so many competing events and competing draws on your time. I should just say that actually that event in London, I was hosting it, but the person who was the real expert was Patrick Harvey, who came down specially to speak to London about the Yes campaign, and it went very well, I think. It's actually lovely to be back in Edinburgh, and indeed in Leith, because I've only really spent one other period here, and that was during the last Scottish parliamentary election. And it just so happens that Jim Jepps, who's my partner, was the Scottish Greens campaign coordinator then. And so I feel almost right at home here. And one of the things that really struck me about being involved in Scottish politics then was it already felt like a different country. And that's not just because of the tenement stairs that you have to climb up and down, which are, I believe, a truly unique experience for political campaigning that you cannot really reproduce anywhere else in the rest of the country. I've been introduced, yes, the accent is Australian, so you don't have to sit there wondering about that. And I was very taken by what you said about civic nationalism, about the idea of different identities. As you were saying, you can be all kind of different identities. And it's interesting because, you know, people will usually guess my original identity quite quickly from my accent. But it actually has a great advantage and a reminder about the other identities we all have. And I said this to John Harris from The Guardian just after I was elected 2 years ago as Green Party leader. There's one great advantage about an Australian accent. It's absolutely classless. And that works quite well in British politics. One of the things that I really feel perhaps that feels different about the streets of Edinburgh today, and you know, I've been here for a few hours, I'm not going to claim great expertise, but there is really a real sense of excitement, a sense of possibility. And I went out and did a little bit of canvassing and just talking to people, and lots of people are really excited about the possibility of difference, of change, about building something new. And this actually reminds me, and I'm dating myself by age here, as a young Australian I did a classic big trip around Europe in 1990. And that was of course the year after the Berlin Wall came down, the year that communism had basically collapsed. And there's something that reminds me here in Edinburgh today about the mood that I found on the streets of Prague then. There was a real sense that we're rebuilding a whole new society. And I particularly remember one conversation I had at a bus stop. I started chatting to a woman, she worked out I was Australian, and she turned round and fixed me with a flinty grin and said, "So how do you solve the childcare problem?" To which my only real answer was, well, we don't, and we still haven't actually. But people were trying to say, look at different models, look at different ways of doing things, and say, how could we do that? How can we arrange that? And that is really exciting, really possible, and you think about the possibilities of being there. Nonetheless, what I really want to stress, really want to say, is that I have not just got off our lovely publicly owned, for now, East Coast train line and come up here to Edinburgh today to tell Scotland how to vote. I don't think that's right. In the Green Party, we very much believe in self-determination and people making their own decisions. So I think you've had quite a stream. I've certainly seen some of them in the London papers. Celebrities, actors, chefs, political experts like that coming up and telling you how you should vote. Well, I'm actually not going to do that. But what I'm going to share, what I primarily want to talk about, is share with you the fact that there's a lot of excitement in the rest of the UK about the possibility of Scottish independence and what it could mean, the positive possibilities it could have for the rest of the UK. It's interesting because it's pretty well stopped now, but a few months ago, lots and lots of journalists in London were asking me, so do you have a position on the referendum? And I'd start off by answering sort of in the obvious way. Well, you might have noticed I'm the leader of the Green Party of England and Wales. Our Scots went independent in 1990. And at the simplest level, the answer of why the Green Party of England and Wales supports the yes vote is simply because shortly after that choice was made, our Scots made their own choice of self-determination. The England and Wales Party passed a motion at conference, democratically as we do, that said on any Scottish issue, our position will be the Scottish Greens issue. So at a very simple answer, that's why we're pro-independence. But of course, we very strongly believe in the principle of localism in the Green Party. That's something that goes across the Green Parties of Europe and beyond. And so the idea of people making decisions, to the people who are affected by them, making those decisions close to where they live, where they work, where those decisions have impact, that principle of localism is very important, as of course is the principle of self-determination. But there's a lot more than that, because let's cast our minds forward 2 years, 5 years after a yes vote. And think about, and the Scottish Greens have got some great stuff up the back there, what kind of society you could create in Scotland. Now it's interesting because tomorrow morning, I'm afraid I'm jumping on the sleeper tonight, tomorrow morning I'll be joining the Jarrow March, the People's March for the NHS. They started out from Jarrow. They started out from Jarrow and they'll be finishing in London on Saturday, and I won't be able to join them on Saturday because Green Party England and Wales Conference starts on Friday. But I'll be joining them between Bedford and Luton tomorrow, walking with them. And that's a reminder of how much the whole of the UK is currently going in utterly the wrong direction. The dreadful racing privatisation of the NHS that's part of a much broader racing privatisation, a whole model that we know is broken, a model that we know and we know that model of privatisation is built on three things. It's built on cutting the pay and condition of workers, it's built on cutting the quality of services, and it's built on shoveling public money into private hands and very often off into the nearest tax haven. But what you've got in Scotland is the possibility of breaking with that, because there's something very exciting about Scotland looking up from down south. You are not, your voters, your whole society has never been neoliberal. You've done exactly the right thing with the Tories, which is not have any of them at all. But much more, you've never accepted that doctrine. Now that doctrine is, with ordinary voters in Britain, in England and Wales, very much falling out of favour. The fact is, this is a fact that I often stun journalists with. I spend a lot of time talking about renationalising the railways, and Caroline Lucas has a private member's bill now before Parliament to do just that. And the fact is, even Tory voters, a majority of them back renationalising the railways. This radical idea that only the Green Party holds is the view of about 70% of voters. And I'm sure in Scotland, what you've got the chance to do with an independent Scotland is create a society that reflects those views of the voters on issues like privatisation. And of course, what you've got a tremendous, exciting and potentially really globally significant chance to do is throw out Trident nuclear weapons. And now, if you think back, it's almost exactly a year ago now that there was a surprise vote in Westminster. There was a vote against military intervention in Syria. Now, that vote was actually something of an accident. It was a sign of just how utterly incompetent our coalition government is. Had they got themselves a bit more organised, they would have won the vote. But nevertheless, if you look at the impacts that vote had, they were really significant. Because actually, after that, President Obama decided that he needed Congress's backing to throw high explosive into Syria. And then he decided he didn't really want to do it at all. And then the French got left stranded, having been the people going, yeah, we want to do it. And the situation in Syria is hideous, it's dreadful, but it would not have been improved by the West throwing high explosive into it. And so, the fact is that that single kind of accidental decision in Westminster had a big impact. And so start to think about what Scotland throwing out trident nuclear weapons might have in terms of really starting to swing a global tide. We're signatories to commitments to total global nuclear disarmament. Scotland could lead on that. An independent Scotland could lead on that. And then, of course, there's the obvious, what you might call, what the journalists call the green stuff. And, I have to say that if there's going to be an argument against the yes vote, there's a single figure that perhaps supports that argument. And that's the fact that currently Britain, collectively, ranks 26th out of 28 developed countries for our percentage of energy coming from renewables. We're ahead of Malta and Luxembourg. Now, I haven't actually got the figures on this, but I suspect I know where we'd end up if you vote yes and leave the United Kingdom. I think we'll end up as 28th. But nevertheless, I think that's going to be quite a good push to actually get England and Wales to do something about renewable energy. But seriously, on renewable energy, you have enormous resources. You have the opportunity to create the policies to use those resources, to have the affordable, reliable energy that we need, and also to have decent energy conservation policies that we haven't got at the moment. And you can build a Scotland that's a truly green Scotland, and again, that's leading the world. And, I think when you look at your wave power, I think you can probably do quite a lot with that. So, I think I've been obviously watching the debate, and I think it's really important to focus on the fact that there's been a huge amount of hot air used up. Could probably have powered something with all of that hot air in the debate about currency and EU membership. And I think it's really disappointing, perhaps not surprising, but I think those are two debates to be had after the vote. If Scotland votes yes, then there's a negotiation, a discussion. The Scottish Greens have a whole plan for how we might go forward, but that's the point where you work out how it happens. Anyone from the no camp who now says, oh, you can't have the pound, they're the no campaign. That's part of this campaign. The part of the decision of what kind of economy you build in the future comes after the vote. And it's exactly the same thing about EU membership. Those are debates for further on, not debates for now. Now, I think, someone like that at the back, thank you. So you could build a real model on these islands, a model state, a model society on these islands. And that's one exciting possibility that when we look up from England and Wales, we can see that as a really exciting possibility, create the models that we could then, when we get a different government, copy. But actually there's possibly an even more exciting possibility about the nature of a yes vote that I think that we have started to talk about a little in England and Wales. And I actually really had this clarified by me at a public meeting, and I spend a lot of my life just going around England and Wales, public meetings, taking a question on anything at all, anything you can imagine from the audience. And so I had a guy who was a very strong no vote who said, there's been very little constitutional debate in England and Wales about what Scottish independence would mean. And I said, yes, you're right. And he said, "But there's going to be constitutional chaos." And I said, "Great!" Because some creative chaos is what we absolutely desperately need. If you actually look at Westminster, you walk around the halls of Westminster, you see all those statues of those dead white males that you walk past endlessly. I have to say, Scottish Parliament looks a lot better than that. Walk past those, and you actually think about it, and you think of the fact that nothing has really changed in Westminster since women got the vote. There has been no real reform in Westminster since then. And we've got almost 100 years of pent-up demand for reform. And if we have some of that creative constitutional chaos that I was talking about, one of the big things that would happen is there'd be huge pressure for a written constitution. At the moment, we have Britain's unwritten constitution. We have everything based on precedent and prior practice. And lots of that prior practice will actually just go out the window with an independent Scotland. And so, just imagine if we write down some of the way things are currently done. And I'm not just talking about the breeches, you know, the men in tights and the swords and the wigs and all that sort of stuff. I'm talking about the serious stuff. The fact that there's a guy called the Remembrancer, who's the only non-MP allowed on the floor of the House of Commons, and he's the representative of the City of London, and he explicitly is there to represent the interests of the financial sector. Now, you actually write that down and say the financial sector will have a special representative on the floor of Parliament and no one else will. It's going to kind of explode off the page in incredulity. The ink just won't be able to take it. And you think about how people end up in the House of Lords. Sometimes they happen to have been born into the right family, or sometimes they happen to have donated into the right pocket, or sometimes they just, you know, were someone's hairdresser or something, and they end up deciding being in the House of Review and the House of Lords. Write all of that down and just watch the ink go. I can't stay on the page like this. So there's a real possibility, if Scotland votes yes, there's a real chance for you to not just lead in terms of issues like Trident, in terms of issues like renewable energy, particularly in terms of issues like the NHS and anti-privatisation and reversing privatisation, and not even just a model for you to offer to the rest of the UK, however it rearranges itself. What you can offer is the chance for change. And the fact is, change is coming, but it's not coming quick enough or in the right directions. And you can push that change towards a whole society that's reshaped, because it's very clear, our financial model, our economic model, our social model, the inequalities in our society, our environmental model where we're all using the resources of 3 planets collectively every year, though we've only got 1. This isn't going to continue. It's time to change, go in a new direction, make new choices, make a positive, creative change. And that's why I'm very excited about the possibilities. I'm very excited about the polls and the latest polling results. And I'm very excited about what you can achieve here in Scotland. Thank you.